The spreadsheet is all encompassing. You will find out. Oh, come on, Quinn. You could totally do that.
I think we're back on the record now. Oh, what? Not yet? Oh, oh, very good. Okay. Oh, sorry. No. Correct.
But yes is the answer.
You may proceed. Witness.
Good afternoon, Mr. McCarthy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Nelson.
Right. So with the assistance of staff, and thank you very much, I put up on the screen here, so we have that ready, exhibit QMM1. Before we continue, I want to identify a couple other documents, make sure you have that handy. So in the large pile in front of you, you see KELP Exhibit 3, it's the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Gorman. You have that? I think it's the rest of that pile. Then in the little pile, just so that you're ready, can you pull out, should be on the tabs, a Northwestern's response to KELP 003 and Northwestern's response to KELP 25. You just make those so you have them at the ready. That will assist us moving efficiently. You see those, sir?
Said 003
and 025. Oh, I'm sorry, 052. I'm having a dyslexic moment.
There it is.
My apologies.
Okay.
It's a number with some 5s and 2s in it. Okay. Excellent. Mr. McCarthy, I have a few questions I'd like to go through with you today about your pre-filed testimony and exhibits. And if I could, we'll actually start with your pre-filed testimony. Do you have that in front of you, sir?
I do.
All right. Let me start by referring you to page QMM5 of that testimony, and let me know when you have that in front of you.
Okay.
At page QMM5, do you see a question and answer starting at line 4 and continuing on through the end of that page, where you're discussing the disagreement between yourself and Mr. Gorman about whether or not the point of measurement for the avoided energy prices should be the Colstrip node or the Rosebud node? Do you see that testimony generally, sir?
I do.
Okay. Would you agree with me that QF avoided cost pricing requires that the QF be paid the price that the utility would incur generating or buying power from another generator if the QF was not selling energy to the utility?
I'm going to object. It's calling for a legal conclusion. I think the avoided energy rates are spelled out in FERC's Order 872.
So this witness offers substantial testimony on what is the appropriate avoided energy rate. And as such, if he's not qualified to testify about what the appropriate avoided energy rate is, I have concerns about his testimony in the first place. So I guess I don't disagree that what avoided energy rates are is a question that involves law, but that's entirely what this portion of this witness's testimony is about. So I think he's competent to answer these questions.
This portion of his testimony states what node that those rates should be based off of. If you ask him that question, I think that's fine. But I think FERC Order 872 establishes which node the energy rate should be based off of for avoided energy costs.
That's, well, the issue here is that the testimony says that one node is preferred to another because of the avoided energy cost that it creates. And so I think these issues are inextricably linked. But
I agree. Overruled. Proceed.
Mr. Nelson, could you please repeat the question?
would you agree with me that the avoided energy price should be calculated by looking at the price the utility would otherwise incur by generating or buying power from another generator if the QF was not selling energy, right?
I believe that the appropriate price would be for the avoided cost of energy would be at the node indicated by the market, in this case, the energy imbalance market for that hour in that 5-minute interval.
Okay. And I appreciate that, but let me try to focus the question. What the debate between you and Mr. Gorman as to whether the right node is the Colstrip node or the Rosebud node, both assume a node in the energy imbalance market. Is that fair?
That is fair.
And you recommend using the Colstrip node because I presume that you conclude that that node is the appropriate node to calculate the avoided energy cost. Is that right?
No, sir. I recommend that the Rosebud node be used.
Thank you. I said that exactly backwards. I appreciate that. You recommend that the Rosebud node be used for purposes of calculating the avoided energy price, right?
Correct.
And so here's my question. If Rosebud kelp did not exist, you have that in mind?
I do.
Would Northwestern buy power at the Rosebud node from anyone else?
No.
Would it be fair to say that the closest node to Rosebud, where Northwestern could buy energy from if kelp was not operating, is the Colstrip node?
No, sir. The node could be any node within the energy imbalance market. It wouldn't necessarily be the Colstrip node. It could be any node.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But would you agree with me that the closest node to Rosebud is the Colstrip node?
To be honest with you, sir, I'd have to look at the node map and I guess do the math on the mileage. And I don't know that answer off the top of my head.
Okay. Are you aware of another electric power generator that sits in between the kelp facility and the Colstrip facility?
There are actually a variety of pricing nodes around the Colstrip facility.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about capacity need. And now we're going to get to the exciting spreadsheet. Now, the spreadsheet which has been put up on the screen here, am I correct that that is your exhibit QMM1?
That's correct.
That spreadsheet shows, amongst many things, but it shows as a general principle, Northwestern's capacity needs that you analyzed for this case using the RAP methodology. And it shows Northwestern's capacity needs that you presented in this case using the ELCC methodology, right?
That's correct.
As we compare these two different methodologies as an initial matter, would you agree with me that the Montana Commission has never approved the use of the RAP methodology to determine Northwestern's capacity needs?
Yes, that is my understanding.
You also agree with me that in the past, the methodology that the company and the commission have used and that the company has used and that the commission has approved has been the ELCC methodology, correct?
Correct. In the past.
I want to start by talking about how your analysis under these two approaches impacts kelp, okay? So just to orient the commission and council and yourself, as a general principle, am I correct that the first two tabs on this spreadsheet show the winter and summer analysis that you did under the RAP methodology, correct?
Correct.
And then the next two tabs on the spreadsheet show the winter and summer capacity analysis that you did using the ELCC methodology, correct?
Correct.
So I want to start by orienting you on the first tab, the RAP winter, and I'll call your attention to row 57, which I believe is the row that shows kelp. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what that information provides is the RAP assigned capacity value for kelp in the years that are presented, which are limited to 2022 and 2023, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, that analysis shows that the RAP assigned a capacity to kelp of 12.2 megawatts, right?
Correct.
Would you agree with me? Well, let me ask, have you been in the hearing so far?
I have, yes.
Okay. So would you agree with me that the current contract between kelp and Northwestern has a limit on how much total energy kelp can provide to Northwestern over the course of a year? Is that correct?
Yes, I understand there's a specified limit.
And that limit, you understand, if it is reached, for example, at the end of, well, let me back up. Do you understand that the contract year runs from July to June?
I'm generally aware of that.
Okay. So as a practical matter, one of the issues that has been talked about in the hearing, did you understand that if kelp reaches the maximum level of kilowatt hours, sometimes it has to decrease or even shut off operations toward the end of the contract year in June? Did you recall that testimony?
I do.
Okay. And so this RAP analysis, would you agree with me, is modeling information that Northwestern provided to RAP based on kelp's historic performance, correct?
That's correct. The RAP used the unforced outage methodology in determining the capacity accreditation for kelp.
And so that capacity accreditation reflects contract limitations on kelp as well as operating limitations. Would that be fair?
The methodology essentially uses historical generation and availability to develop the capacity contribution.
Right. And by doing that, because of the contractual limits impacting the way kelp operated, that data takes into account the way that kelp was limited both by the physical plant and by the contract, right?
Yes, that is generally correct in how it would play out.
Now, can you please go to the second tab? We're going to go through the same question. So if you could navigate to row 57 for me. You see that, sir? Are you in row 57?
Yes,
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I can't see the row numbers from here.
Oh.
My eyesight's not that good. So
yes,
I
tab 2, row
apologize.
57.
Okay. During the winter months for 2022 and 2023, the RAP calculation using the data provided by Northwestern assigns a capacity value to kelp of 32.8 megawatts. Is that correct?
Yes,
Now, can you go to tab 3? This is the ELCC winter calculation, correct? I'm sorry, ELCC summer calculation, right? Nope.
it is the winner.
Sorry, winter. Gosh, yeah, I gotta get better glasses. In the ELCC methodology for the winter, kelp is indicated at a 34 megawatt capacity, correct?
Correct.
If you go to the next tab on the summer, ELCC kelp is also 34 megawatts, correct?
Correct.
Would you agree with me that the ELCC methodology at 34 megawatts there, that is being calculated as based on a 97% availability factor for kelp, correct?
That is one way, yes, to characterize it.
Okay, well, let's just, to be clear then, can you pull up the response to kelp 003 that I asked you to pull out? You have that in front of you, sir?
I do.
And if you look at the responses to section D and E, you agree with me that your data response indicated that the analysis was based on an assumed 97% availability factor for kelp, right?
Yes, or the effective load carrying capacity.
Now, in order to get to the 34, am I correct that the analysis that you did here started with a capacity of 35 megawatts, right?
Yes,
That was based on the limitation in the contract, not kelp's actual operating limitation, correct?
it's based on the interconnection agreement.
And we'll take that up with Ms. Mueller, I assume. But your testimony is that the availability factor is predicated on 35 megawatts.
Yes, in if I might explain, under the RAP program, the participants must have firm transmission capacity for those assets, and since the interconnection is limited to 35 megawatts, the capacity also is limited to 35 megawatts.
Just to rewind a second, the tab we're looking at is the ELCC, not the RAP methodology, right?
Correct.
And in this calculation, you assumed the 35 megawatts and applied a 97% availability factor to derive the 34 megawatts approximately, correct?
Correct.
If I have questions about the interconnection issues, do you want to answer those or should I direct those to Ms. Mueller?
I generally believe you would direct those to Ms. Mueller, but as they would play into the configuration of the spreadsheet, I would assume I would need to comment accordingly.
Fair enough. I think we can leave that for later. Now, in the contract that Northwestern provided in this case, would you agree with me that under the PPA, the contract proposes a maximum capacity of the project at 42 megawatts as discussed by Mr. Schmidt. You recall that?
I do.
So if you did 97% of 42 megawatts, would you agree with me, subject to check, that the number you would get is 40.7 megawatts?
Subject to check, that sounds correct.
Now, in the 4 tabs that we've spoken of, moving on past Kelp's participation in these tabs to other topics, all of these tabs include a discussion of what is described in this chart as the S-Volta, which is ES capital VOLTA project, which has also more perhaps commonly known as the Beartooth battery, correct?
That is correct.
Just for your reference, though, that project, I believe, is shown on line 119 of this chart. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, would you agree with me that under the RAP analysis and the ELCC analysis, the capacity value of the Beartooth project as analyzed is 40 megawatts?
Yes, the accredited capacity is 40 megawatts.
Agree with me that 40 megawatts is pretty close to 40.7 megawatts?
Generally,
Let's talk about the difference between how the RAP and how the ELCC methodologies calculate available capacity as a general principle. And let's start, Mr. McCarthy, I want to start by talking about the category of projects which are described on these charts as online wind projects. So if you go to the first tab and you go up to line 59, from line 59 to line 77, there's a collection of data all under the header wind generation online. Is that correct?
that's correct.
And what is, in for purposes of this chart and this table, what does online mean?
It means that the asset is producing.
So for this category of resources, and we'll start with the winter analysis. For the winter RAP in 2024, do you agree with me that the analysis shows 135 megawatts of cumulative capacity contribution from the resources that are in this bucket of online wind generation?
I agree.
Now, I want you to tab over a couple to the winter ELCC analysis. Can you please, again, go to line 59 to 77? You there? Yes.
I am.
Under the ELCC analysis, again for 2024, the group of online wind projects only has a capacity accreditation of 59 megawatts, right?
Correct.
So by moving from the ELCC analysis methodology to the RAP methodology, for purposes of the capacity contribution from the existing wind projects, the RAP methodology assumes a capacity contribution that is more than double the level in the ELCC method, right?
Correct.
Let's go down to the next category and look at expected wind, and that starts at line 78. And again, if you could slide over to the wrap one first. What does expected mean in the context of this table, sir?
Expected would mean that one of two things: either the resource has had a filing with the commission or has a contract with Northwestern.
Now, for the expected win, I'm going to suggest we look at 2025. You see that from 2024 to 2025, another project gets added to the expected win. Do you see that, sir?
I do.
Okay, so let's focus on 2025 when this bucket is full, if you would. Would you agree with me that the winter wrap methodology assigns an expected capacity value for these collection of resources of 59 megawatts?
Yes.
Again, if you could tab over to the winter ELCC, do you agree with me that the current ELCC methodology assigns a value of these expected resources of only 10 megawatts of expected capacity, right?
Yes.
So again, mathematically, the wrap methodology assumes a capacity contribution from these expected projects that's nearly 6 times higher than the methodology currently used by Northwestern and the commission, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Let's look at lines 97 and what is called the expected hybrid QF. And if you can go back to the wrap one first. Slide down just a little bit. Let's get there we go. Perfect. Okay. What is the expected hybrid QF? What is that?
With the Caithness project, sir, it's a combination of battery and wind.
Okay. That's the hybrid part of that title. Is that fair?
Yes.
And it's expected because it's under contract, but not yet in existence.
Correct. Yes.
And I guess maybe I'm assuming that is it actually under contract or is it just expected to be under contract? You know?
I do not know that off the top of my head, sir.
Okay. But
I'm sure Whitney Schmidt would know off the top of his head.
sure. That's all right. It doesn't really matter. Okay. Let's look at what the wrap assumes as a capacity contribution for this collection of resources. Do you see there at the bottom of this collection that the wrap analysis assumes a capacity contribution for these resources of 113 megawatts?
Yes, I do.
And then again, already anticipating me, if you go to the third tab under the ELCC methodology, that same bucket of resources is assigned a capacity value of only 46 megawatts, right?
Correct.
So again, just doing the simple math, the wrap methodology creates an assumed capacity contribution from that collection of projects that's more than twice as great as the ELCC methodology, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Look at how the wrap and ELCC compare for thermal resources. Can you go back to the first slide? Let's look at line 45 to 50. You there, sir?
I am there.
All right. So can you just first level set what is the collection of things called existing thermal resource? What's included in that?
The Basin Creek facility and the Dave Gates facility.
And those are both the existing thermal gas, right? Let's just make sure I got that straight.
Yes, thermal gas.
So for the thermal gas resources that are existing, the winter wrap accreditation for capacity is 195 megawatts, correct?
199.
Sorry, 199 megawatts. Can you go to the ELCC? Since I got the first of them wrong, I now have a crisis of confidence. What is the ELCC accreditation for that same collection of resources?
195.
All right, just had them backwards. So that's about a 2% difference. Is that right?
Subject to check. That sounds correct.
And then let's go back to the wrap and talk about the existing thermal coal, which you can find, I think, if you look on line 54.
I believe it's 50. Yes. 54 through
54 through 58.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And all right. And again, we're gonna move past 2024 because that's gonna pick up the kelp issues that we've already discussed. So let's look at 2025. What is the accreditation under WRAP for the collection of existing thermal coal resources in 2025?
278 megawatts.
You go to the ELCC. What does the ELCC say is the accreditation for that collection?
254 megawatts.
So 9% difference between those two, right?
Subject to check. That sounds correct.
So when you go from the ELCC to the WRAP, would you agree with me that there is a significant change in the capacity accreditation for the variable energy resources that are being considered in these analyses?
Yes. And that is due to the much broader footprint that the URAP program would provide, a much more diversified load, a much more diversified pool of resources. And that is the reason for the incremental capacity under the WRAP program.
Okay. Take a look at KELP Exhibit 3, please. That's Mr. Gorman's testimony. In that, if you could look close to the back, is his exhibit MPG 8, which is the earnings call, transcript, and PowerPoint slide. You have that in front of you, sir?
I do.
Very good. Could I please ask you to turn to, make sure I got the page number right here. Yeah, if I could turn to what's called page 50 of 56, if you look at the headers at the top corner of that exhibit. Page 50 of 56 will be near the back. Maybe should have stapled these. I apologize.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask, do we need to continue screen sharing that spreadsheet?
Thank you, Commissioner. I have no further questions of this witness about the spreadsheet. And so for my purposes, it could be taken down for this time unless there's obviously other questions.
Can we do that without an interruption? Okay, good.
And would it be easy to pull it back up for redirect? Perfect.
Fascinating charts, though. Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right. Mr. McCarthy, did you find page 50 of 56?
I believe I'm very close, Mr. Nelson.
Okay. And the heading on that is de-risking the Montana capacity deficit. You see that?
I do.
Okay. This was discussed early in the hearing, but do you recall the discussion that this slide deck was presented in an investor call by Northwestern in October of this year? Do you recall that generally?
Yes, I do.
Now, on page 50 of 56, do you see there is a red box on the far left that says 2025 capacity deficit parentheses prior, right?
On the far left?
Yeah, on the far left, there's a large red box that goes.
Okay, yes, I see it.
And then it shows, if I understand this presentation, a capacity deficit of minus 725 megawatts. You see that, sir?
I do.
Okay, and that's identified as the 2025 capacity deficit, correct?
I believe so.
And then moving over, there's a blue box that has the a positive 300 megawatts. Do you see that, sir?
I do.
And am I correct that that is showing that there are 3 buckets of new capacity that is being added to offset the 725 megawatts of capacity deficit? Is that generally fair?
Yes,
And the 3 buckets of what's being added are a 5-year, 100 megawatt PPA, primarily hydro. Do you see that, sir?
yes,
Then there's a 20-year, 50 megawatt battery project, right?
I do.
And then the Yellowstone plant, right?
Yes,
Now, just so we're all clear, that battery project shown here, that's no longer happening, right?
I believe that that is correct.
Now, what I wanted to focus then on is the next blue box is an additional 200 megawatts of capacity to offset the big red box of deficit. Do you see that, sir?
I do.
And that box is described in the bottom, and it's described as potential QFs and increased accredited capacity of existing resources. You see that, sir?
I do.
That increased accredited capacity, that box, that's a calculation that sums up all of the things that we just went through on the chart in terms of the difference between the way the ELCC method accredited capacity and the way the RAP accredits capacity, correct?
I don't know that off the top of my head, sir. I would have to reconcile those items to be able to confirm that.
We just went through, there is a change in the accredited capacity moving from the ELCC to the RAP methodology.
There is.
Would you agree with me, though, that that change in accredited capacity does not mean that there is any change to the actual generating facilities or how they are designed or how they operate, correct?
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. No.
And maybe we'll go back to this, when we talked about the existing wind projects, the fact that the RAP methodology has a higher accredited capacity than the ELCC methodology, does that change reflect any change to the actual physical characteristics of those plants?
No, but the increase in existing resources could come from essentially hydro upgrades or other things that Northwestern has pursued in the past, is pursuing in the future. It could be a variety of things.
Fair enough. All right. You started with an explanation, which I want to give you a chance to elaborate on, that explained why the RAP accreditation for those wind resources was so much higher than the ELCC accreditation for those same wind resources. So I just want to give you a chance. Did you fully explain from your perspective why there is that difference?
Well, sir, I could reiterate and say that the RAP program is a regional program, encompasses a significantly larger footprint than just the Northwestern Energy Balancing Authority. When you consider the larger region and the diversification of wind production across the larger footprint, the capacity value or credit capacity increases due to that diversity.
But would you agree with me that the RAP calculation is focused on the regional peak, not exclusively on Northwestern's peak needs?
I think more accurately characterize it as the RAP is focused on the capacity critical hours, which may indeed be a peak, is how I would describe it.
But they measure those critical hours for the region as a whole, not just Northwestern's Montana service territory, correct?
That's correct.
And so there is this diversity shift in both the load peak and the generation resources that causes this shift in accreditation. Is that fair?
Yes, generally.
Okay. As we sit here today, is there any guarantee that the people who are participating in the RAP on a voluntary basis will participate in the RAP when it becomes a binding program?
I guess I would say, sir, that there are a variety of entities that have disclosed that they intend to join the RAP and participate going forward. There's roughly 26 entities now. That's what we anticipate at this current time. I don't have any other reason to believe that that would change in the future.
Sure, but if it did, then wouldn't it be true, for example, if half of those companies somehow decided not to participate in the binding program, the regional benefits that you get when you calculate load and resources on a regional basis, those might not remain, correct?
That's possible.
For purposes of calculating a load and resource balance exclusively in Northwestern's service territory in Montana instead of regionally, would you agree with me that the ELCC methodology is designed to do that?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. I have no further questions of this witness.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
You should have a card, dude. Just says same thing, you know. Very good. And now, Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCarthy, I think I have just a few that I'll try to move through quickly. Do you have access to MPG 9? That's exhibit MPG 9. It was included with Mr. Gorman's rebuttal testimony.
Yes, sir, I do.
All right. Could you turn to page 1 of that and look at line 1? This lists a revenue requirement levelized for the Yellowstone generating facility. Is that correct?
That's what it purports to represent. I do not believe that that is what it represents. In fact, Mr. Hamilton, I believe that Mr. Gorman's levelized revenue requirement is overstated by approximately $33 million.
Fair enough. Fair enough. based on your understanding of what is represented in Exhibit MPG 9, do you understand that any amount of the revenue requirement reflected on page 2 of this exhibit is including an overbuild of the facility to include any sort of step-up loss from the generator to the bus?
Are you referring to page 1, sir, of the exhibit?
That's correct. Page 1,
Oh, okay.
the revenue requirement reflected on page 1, which is of course part of, is documented more fully in page 2.
Okay, and I apologize. Could you restate the question?
Yeah. Does any amount of that revenue requirement factor in an overbuild of the facility to accommodate for any step up loss between the generator and the bus?
Yes, and I guess I would answer that question in that the Yellowstone County Generating Station nameplate capacity is indicated at 175 megawatts. And according to Mr. Gorman's exhibit, the accredited capacity he is using is 160 megawatts, which I don't believe is appropriate. I believe 170 megawatts is appropriate. I believe that the 5 megawatt discount from the nameplate down to 170 megawatts, that represents a slight altitude derate but mostly parasitic load from the plant. And that reduction would replace the transmission loss 2.8%, essentially by reducing the nameplate capacity down to 170 megawatts, you would account for any losses between the generator and the point of interconnection. So I believe that grossing up the numbers again by an additional 2.8% is inappropriate.
I think that answers most of my questions, but just so that I can make sure I understand, you're saying that the 5 megawatt discount from the nameplate capacity to what you would propose as the accredited capacity of 170 megawatts would include the altitude adjustment and step up line loss?
I would clarify, sir, that the revenue requirement, that 52,175,24 number is again overstated. It is the payment based on the present value of Mr. Gorman's proposed, or I guess from his exhibit, which again I don't agree with, but the additional impact to the bottom avoided cost of capacity per kW month is impacted by the level of accredited capacity and the transmission loss assumptions that he's used here.
All right. Again, I appreciate your position on the revenue requirement reflected on line 1 of page 1 here. But again, just so that I can understand, the necessity of stepping up the voltage between the generator and the transmission system, that is accounted for in your understanding with the 5 megawatt deduction that you would propose from the nameplate capacity to 170 megawatts.
That's correct, because that's what the plant will provide at the point of interconnection.
Thank you very much. That answers all of my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Fielder?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Pinochi? Thank you. Commissioner Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Probably heard me ask the last witness about who would be the most appropriate witness to ask questions about the RAP program. You call that, and he identified you. I think the good news for both of us is that the majority of my questions were asked in the intervening proceedings. The only question I have left about RAP is, do you know when the RAP capacity requirements will be binding on all the enrolled parties?
Yes, and I would respond to that in 2 parts, because there's a partially binding phase and a full binding phase. So the partially binding phase would start in the summer of 2025. And then roll forward to a full binding phase by the summer of 2028.
Is there I'm going to ask a follow-up. Is there a tariff involved in the RAP program at this point in time?
There is a proposed tariff in front of FERC. FERC has reviewed that tariff, and FERC has found 4 deficiencies that the Western Power Pool is responding to.
Do we have any idea of when that tariff may be approved or if it will ever be approved?
I believe the expectation is sooner than later, sir, but I don't have a definitive time frame for you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I have no questions. Recross? Please.
McCarthy. Oh, thank you, Jason. Maybe we could just go ahead and if we could go ahead and pull the spreadsheet up. I've got a question on that, and then maybe I'll be done and we could move on to any other spreadsheet questions that folks might have, if that would be okay with the chairman.
Yes.
Can I ask you to navigate to the tab 3, the winter ELCC?
Yes, sir.
Correct cell reference here, just. Okay. Can you look at line 118 of that?
Yes, sir.
What does that on column B, row 118, what does that chart show is the nameplate capacity for the Yellowstone County Generating Station?
It reflects 170 megawatt value, sir, but I do have a note in there indicating that the nameplate is 175, but it is derated down to 170.
What is the guaranteed capacity that you receive from your contractor for the Yellowstone County Generating Station?
165 megawatts is the minimum, sir.
Why did so does that mean that if it turns out that the plant can only generate 165 megawatts, that there would have been no breach of the agreement between you and your contractor who's building the plant, right?
I don't know, sir. I'm not an attorney.
Fair enough. Do you understand that when it comes to the avoided capacity, that the avoided capacity that you're proposing that KELP be paid for is not the nameplate capacity, but it is rather the accredited capacity, correct?
Well, sir, I would take issue with the proxy resource being the Yellowstone County Generating Station to begin with. So I don't agree with that assertion as the avoided cost proxy.
Back up. For KELP, what Northwestern is proposing to pay KELP is not its nameplate capacity, it is its accredited capacity, correct?
Correct, accredited by the RAP program.
So if you're going to pay KELP based on the accredited capacity, wouldn't it make sense to base the calculation of the avoided cost of the accredited capacity of the proxy resource instead of its nameplate?
I believe that that in this calculation, it is based, the Yellowstone project is based on 170 megawatts, which is not the nameplate capacity.
Sure, but so Dave Gates, if we use Dave Gates, and Yellowstone both have a nameplate capacity and then a lower accredited capacity, correct?
Yes.
What I'm saying is, regardless of which resource we use as the proxy, if the proposal is to pay Kelp based on its accredited capacity instead of its nameplate, wouldn't it make sense to do the avoided cost calculation based on the accredited capacity of the proxy resources?
It would, sir, if you had the appropriate level of firm transmission in an interconnection agreement. Currently, the interconnection agreement with Kelp is at 135 megawatts. That would limit the accredited capacity, I believe, under the RAP program.
First, to avoid redirect, did you mean to say?
Or I meant to say,
35
I did, correct.
Okay.
My mistake, sir. Yes, 35.
Okay, so, and I appreciate that you have to, that whatever Kelp's accredited capacity might be up in the air, but methodologically, wouldn't it make sense to have those be the same? That is, if we're paying on the accredited capacity, we calculate the rate on accredited capacity from a methodological perspective.
Yes.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moran? No questions, thank you. Redirect?
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. McCarthy, I believe opposing counsel started with asking you questions about the appropriate LMP node. What's the receipt point on Northwestern system where it'll receive energy from Kelp?
The Rosebud node.
And the energy Northwestern receives from Colstrip Unit 4 is received at the Colstrip Unit 4 node. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is Colstrip Unit 4 a QF?
No, sir, not to my knowledge.
And opposing counsel asked whether this commission has ever had an opportunity to review the RAP before. Has Northwestern ever had an opportunity to present the RAP analysis before the commission?
To my knowledge, it is not. This is the first opportunity.
And opposing counsel walked through the RAP analysis. If you want to click over to Kelp's historic performance.
Okay.
And he suggested that it was lower because of contractual limitations. Is that fair?
Contractual limitations could play a part in it. It's generally based upon, again, the unforced outage method that would take into account the plant's availability and historical production, which could be impacted by the way the contract is written. It's hard to say specifically.
Yeah. And the reason that opposing counsel suggested that the contract limited is because the contract limited energy payments up to about 306 million megawatt hours. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
So, and the reason its capacity is lower here is because it had already produced all those megawatt hours through and to incentivize its own payments under the contract, right?
That could be part of it. Part of it could be scheduled outage during that time or unscheduled outage during that time. The historical information would indicate as such. Off the top of my head, I don't know if they hit the contractual limitation or if there was an outage
Okay, but
contributing to the lower capacity contribution.
if they maximize their energy rates during, during a period of the contract, and then Northwestern, that means they wouldn't have been available for Northwestern at times when it needed capacity, right?
That's correct, because the RAP calculation would apply the capacity during the capacity critical hours when you would need the capacity.
So because Kelp maximized its own financial incentives by maximizing its energy payments, it wouldn't have been available to Northwestern when it needed capacity.
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence as to why Kelp did whatever it may have done.
Sustain.
If Kelp maximized its energy limit before Northwestern needed capacity in a particular contract year, would Kelp have been available to provide Northwestern capacity?
I'm sorry, would you please restate that?
Sure. If Kelp maximized its contractual energy limits before the end of a contract year, and Northwestern needed capacity after that, Kelp wouldn't have been available, or Kelp couldn't have provided it to Northwestern, right?
Yes, that is a distinct possibility.
And are you aware that Kelp represented through this docket that in historical years after it had met its contractual energy limits, that it actually sold to third parties?
I am generally aware of it.
And with respect to the ELCC calculation, is it still important for ELCC analysis for a resource to have firm transmission?
Yes.
With respect to the Beartooth battery, I'm not going to go over all the same questions I asked Mr. Smith, but did you hear Mr. Smith's responses to my questions?
I did.
With respect to the timing of the contract termination and Kelp's claimed LEO date, do you agree with everything that Mr. Smith said?
My memory is not that good, Counselor.
Sure. At the time of as of April 29th, 2022, are you aware that Northwestern was fully committed to the Beartooth battery?
That is my understanding.
And as of April 29th, 2022, are you aware that Northwestern had a pending application before this commission for pre-approval of that battery?
I am aware of that.
And now if we want to go on to this chart we have, I believe I got your explanation about why the RAP shows a higher capacity accreditation for certain resources. And is it a bad thing that to maximize Montana's resources to provide its highest level of benefit across the region?
In my opinion, no, it is not.
And the difference between this ELCC analysis and the RAP analysis is because the ELCC analysis is limited to Montana only, right?
Correct. It would only include the Montana Balancing Authority and therefore would lack the benefits of a larger regional footprint.
Okay, and if you could go up to show the benefits the RAP's providing Northwestern, if you can look at, you're on the ELC side, can you go up to the capacity balance on Northwestern system under the ELCC? It's on line 7.
Okay.
What is that showing?
In this circumstance, it shows that 22 through 25 Northwestern is short of capacity. It is long 26, 27, and short of capacity, starting in 2028 and goes through 2041.
So is it fair to say under the ELCC, Northwestern is significantly short of capacity?
It would appear so.
And can you click over to the RAP? What, that same line, what is Northwestern's capacity position if we use the RAP?
The capacity in 2022 is short. However, in 2023 through 2031, Northwestern has sufficient capacity. Starting in 2032 through 2041, Northwestern is short capacity.
Is it a bad thing to be short on capacity?
In my opinion, yes.
And is it a good thing to have sufficient capacity?
Yes.
So wouldn't it be more beneficial to Northwestern and customers under the RAP program?
It would appear so.
And Mr. Nelson criticized the RAP program because it may be uncertain that future members and don't join in the future. Does Northwestern have any indication that any of those other members that have already committed would back out?
I am not aware of any.
And if you want to go to that MPG 9 again. And just to confirm, this is Kelp's witness, Mr. Gorman's revenue requirement, right?
Correct.
And I believe you told Mr. Hamilton that he overstated that first line on the revenue requirement by $33 million.
I'd like to clarify Mr. Gorman's levelized revenue requirement, I believe, is overstated by 33 million. The present value of that revenue requirement is overstated by $33 million.
Okay, and can you elaborate on that? Tell the commission.
Certainly. The way that Mr. Gorman performed his purported levelized calculation doesn't levelize the entire revenue requirement. It only levelizes the return, the depreciation and income tax lines of the revenue requirement. The lines that it does not levelize, it averages the O&M expense, the gas reservation, and property tax components of that revenue requirement are indeed averaged. And if you average that, there is no discounting taking place. So it overstates the revenue requirement. Now, Mr. Gorman started out with Mr. Durkin's revenue requirement for the Yellowstone County Generating Station, which is correct. But when he escalated the costs out specifically for the gas transmission reservation and the property taxes, he escalated those at 2.25% throughout the 18.5-year period. Now, the gas reservation firm reservation charge will not escalate at that rate. That rate typically stays the same unless that expense will typically stay the same unless the rate changes via a rate case. That rate could conceivably go up or down depending upon or stay the same depending on how the allocated cost of service comes out. But escalating that at 2.25% every year grossly overstates that expense. In the property tax calculation, he takes the number starting in 2024 and escalates that at 2.25% through the 18.5-year period. Property taxes don't escalate at 2.25%. The way that the property tax escalate is based on the way that the mill levies would escalate within the calculation. So essentially, when you calculate property taxes, you'll start with the market value, or in this case, the original cost of the asset. You'll multiply that by a market factor that's provided by the Department of Revenue. Then you'll multiply that by the tax rate, and then you'll multiply that by the mill levy. So if you follow that, you're taking the original cost, multiplying again by the market factor, by the property tax rate, and by the mill rate. The only thing that generally escalates is the mill rate. So the mill rate escalation is about 0.75%, not 2.25%. So that mill rate escalation, it would be more appropriate to escalate it at about 0.75% instead of 2.25%.
Thank you. And with respect to the second line where he has 160 megawatts, they got that off of an investor call. Was there a mistake made for the calculation on the investor call?
Yes. So if we go back to the nameplate of Yellowstone County Generating Station at 175 megawatts, I mentioned a D rate of 5 megawatts for altitude and parasitic load. That was double counted. So essentially, we started out at 175. We deducted it twice. That got us down to 165. And then the 165 was multiplied by 0.97 for the load contribution that it would provide, which gets you to 160 megawatts. There was essentially some double counting of the loss. And that's why 160 megawatts appeared in the investor presentation.
Thank you. And I believe what Mr. Hamilton was covering earlier was, since the parasitic load losses were already included in the 5 megawatt deduction, if you also include the 2.8% that they're proposing, that would double charge customers for the same thing, right?
Yes, I believe it would. And the 2.8% is, I mean, it represents an energy loss based on what Mr. Gorman cites as the Northwestern Ode. Again, it's related to energy. It has nothing to do with capacity. It just really doesn't make any sense to apply that.
Thanks. And then all these mistakes in Mr. Gorman's calculations, those would be detrimental to customers, right?
Indeed, they would. I believe it would be that would calculate through to be about a $4 decrease from the rate that Mr. Gorman proposed at $27.93. It would be closer to $23.95.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. You are temporarily excused. Noticing the hour right here, and in fact, we haven't had a break for a while. I wanted to ask all parties, how long do you expect more? Do you have many more witnesses? I think you had a total of 6, as I recall.
I believe we have 3 witnesses. One thing that I'd like to clarify at this point is there was 4 witnesses that we had that offered data responses. I've consulted with opposing counsel. He's not going to have any cross-examination on them. Jason, will you know? Will any of the commissioners have any cross-examination for Jim Williams, Luke Hansen, Jason McClafferty, or Andy Durkin?
Aware of? No.
Okay, thank you. So I think we will only have three witnesses left. Oh, may those witnesses be permanently excused?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
Thank you.
what are we looking at for winding this whole thing up? If we take a 10-minute break and we have an hour left of today, are we going to get through 3 witnesses or? No, yes.
Mr. Chairman, for your planning purposes, given the cross I have for Mr. Babineau and Ms. Mueller, I do not think we can finish it in the time allotted today. I do not think we will need anywhere near all of tomorrow, but I don't think we can do it today. The wild card is Mr. Jordan, who is proposing to be offered live direct testimony. And so I don't know how long the company has in mind for his live direct testimony. And so since I haven't heard the testimony, very hard to estimate how much cross I might have for that. So that's a bit of a wild card. But I think based on all of those, I think we're looking at tomorrow morning, or sorry, tomorrow before lunch, needing to finish the hearing.
Thank you. That is good. I noted with some dismay in your opening comments that you said you expected today and the next few days, you said, which caused me some great concern. Because I have appointments back home in Billings. So let's take a 10-minute break now, and then we'll reconvene and we'll break at an appropriate time when Northwestern has its next witness. So we're off the record.